This project is made possible through the support of the Center for the Study of Interdisciplinarity. Technology can liberate and enrich the human condition. Just consider the ways in which modern agricultural machines can reduce labor and provide us with abundant food. But, perhaps ironically, the very successes of technology also create new challenges. In this instance, agricultural advances have led to topsoil loss and other environmental problems. Across the spectrum, from medicine to energy to transportation to communication, the questions are the same. How can we best manage the mixed positive and negative impacts of technological advances? What's the right path between a laissez-faire approach, where risk-taking turns into recklessness, and an overly cautious approach, where new benefits go unrealized? These questions are at the heart of the debates about fracking, the technological process that has enabled energy companies to tap into vast, unconventional reserves of oil and gas. And these questions often fall onto the lap of communities and local governments struggling to balance conflicting goals and values, including economic growth and job creation, respect for both surface and mineral property rights, and protection of health, safety, welfare, and land use compatibility. This is the story of one community, the city of Denton, Texas, that has struggled with these questions for 15 years. I hope it will be instructive both for the citizens of Denton and for people in other places around the world trying to figure out what to do about fracking. Denton is named for John B. Denton, a pioneer preacher and lawyer who was killed in an Indian fight in 1841. The city was founded in 1857, 2 years before the nation's first oil well was drilled. And in 1901, the bones of Denton were moved from a nearby ranch and reburied with great fanfare on the courthouse lawn. Denton now sits on the northern tip of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. It is home to 110,000 people and is expected to nearly double in size by 2030. Denton also sits atop the eastern edge of the Barnett Shale, one of the most productive onshore reserves of natural gas in the nation. There are over 17,000 gas wells on the Barnett. Nearly 300 of them are inside Denton's city limits. Despite years of effort and revisions to its natural gas development and production ordinance, the city of Denton has had a difficult time controlling this industry. And as Denton grows westward into areas already heavily pincushioned by gas wells, the problem is only getting worse. On this Railroad Commission map, each blue and red dot represents a gas well. In the story of Denton, we can see all of the larger questions at stake with fracking. There are questions about citizenship in a neoliberal age, and the meaning of democracy when money drives politics, and people are highly dependent on complex systems run by experts. There are questions about the appropriate way to manage technological risks. There are questions about justice, the politics of proximity, and the moral status of being a NIMBY. And there are questions about the meaning of place in the modern world, as fracking traces the fault line between our lives as consumers and as citizens, between placeless networks of commodities and the place-bound communities like Denton that are both sustained and threatened by those networks. All of these questions are packed into one that is far more practical. How much power do local communities have over the oil and gas industry? As citizens across the country turn to local governments to manage fracking, cities and towns are becoming the most important sites of the jurisdictional battle for the right to make the rules. In 1977, President Jimmy Carter told Americans they were in the midst of an energy crisis.
The oil and natural gas that we rely on for 75% of our energy are simply running out. In spite of increased effort, domestic production has been dropping steadily at about 6% a year. Imports have doubled in the last 5 years, and our nation's economic and political independence is becoming increasingly vulnerable.
We were only running out of the easy stuff. Geologists knew about massive reserves of oil and gas and shale formations across the country. It's just that they didn't have the technology to get the hydrocarbons out of the rocks. In the race to develop the next generation of extraction technologies, engineers even tried detonating a nuclear bomb underground to break up gas-bearing shales. As President Carter spoke, the Energy Department was launching the unconventional gas research programs to develop horizontal drilling techniques and field test a process known as hydraulic fracturing. The oil and gas and shale formations are locked in tiny pores, so the rocks have to be blasted apart with a perforating gun and millions of gallons of fluids and chemicals. Sand is also injected into the well to prop open the fractures. This technique was perfected in North Texas, just west of Denton, by the wildcatting engineer and entrepreneur George P. Mitchell. Around the time of Carter's speech, Mitchell's company was depleting their main gas formation, the Boonesville Bend conglomerate, which had been feeding the Chicago market since the mid-1950s. As a relatively small company, they couldn't look for more gas overseas, so they looked deeper at the Barnett Shale, which was the source rock for all of the oil and gas in North Texas. In 1981, about 20 miles southwest of Denton, Mitchell drilled the C.W. Slay No. 1 well, and the following year he connected it to a pipeline, making it the origin well of the Barnett. And given that the Barnett is where fracking was perfected, this well can be considered the epicenter of a global energy revolution. Over the next 16 years, Mitchell sunk $250 million into shale exploration, with little to show for it. His company was running out of money. Many of his own employees thought that Mitchell was a fool to try to make the shale yield its treasures. But in 1998, a young engineer at Mitchell Energy working on this well just outside of Denton found the right recipe. The trick was to replace fracking gels and foams with water. No well in the Barnett had ever produced like this before. Massive, slick-water, light sand hydraulic fracturing was born and was soon married to horizontal drilling. They were in business. In the next few years, Mitchell Energy grew by over 250%. And in 2002, Devon Energy bought the company for $3.1 billion. Here's what a fracking operation looks and sounds like today. This is a video of 2 wells being fracked in 2013, just across the street from the University of North Texas in Denton. Mitchell's success seemed to disprove Carter's Malthusian worldview of scarcity and limitations, and he seemed to confirm the paradoxical thesis of Julian Simon. Earth's resources are, thanks to human ingenuity and technology, essentially infinite. For all practical purposes, we now have more oil and gas than we did in 1977. We don't need to put on a sweater, Simon would say. We just need to unleash the power of engineers. Fracking is a chapter in the story of extreme energy. As more and more people pursue a vision of the good life premised on unlimited consumption, worldwide energy demand continues to soar. Satiating this demand has required more extreme measures, from deep-sea drilling to scalping boreal forests to drilling in backyards. Along the way, ours has become the age in which humanity is a global force. This relentless quest for ever more energy meant that Mitchell's recipe quickly spread to the Marcellus in Pennsylvania and New York, the Bakken in North Dakota, the Niobrara in Colorado, the Monterey in California, and around the world. The U.S. government has been cheering on the resulting boom in oil and gas production. In 2012, the presidential candidates fell over each other to prove who was most pro-fracking. And Obama has embraced fracking as part of his all-of-the-above energy strategy. State regulatory agencies are designed to facilitate the efficient extraction of minerals. They see places as resources waiting to be mobilized. But things look different to the locales hosting gas wells, pipelines, and compressor stations. At the local level, fracking transforms from energy policy to land use policy. It leaves the abstract realm of commodity and enters the lived place of community. From this perspective, an energy boom looks like a hazardous industrial activity next door, one that is uniquely invasive because it feeds on minerals no matter what lies above them, even if it is neighborhoods, parks, playgrounds, or schools. The fact that the surface estate is subservient to the mineral estate makes it challenging for local governments to protect the health, safety, and welfare of their citizens, and to ensure compatibility of neighboring land uses. In the face of such challenges, an increasing number of towns and cities have banned fracking, while others, like Denton, try to manage it with local ordinances. The vital good at stake is local self-determination. If a well is planned near your home or your child's school, you ought to be involved in that decision, and local government is the only political institution that will be responsive. It's their job to care for the fabric of a community and guard quality of life. Those who live in unincorporated areas do not have the protections afforded by home rule cities with their powers of zoning. Out there, only state laws apply, and according to the Texas Railroad Commission, you are not a person in a place, but a node on an energy network. Local government, by contrast, is a place to exercise public liberty, or the ability to meaningfully participate in the decisions that impact your life. As one Denton resident said after a blowout near her home, "When your health and safety are at stake, you should have a say." In the 1930s, Texas courts began recognizing the authority of cities to regulate oil and gas alongside the Railroad Commission. The first legal test came when Tisco Oil Company sued South Houston in 1935. The district court judge rejected Tisco's assertion that South Houston's ordinance was arbitrary and unreasonable. The next landmark case came in 1944, when the Galveston Court of Civil Appeals argued that the Railroad Commission's authority did not subsume existing police powers vested in municipalities to also regulate oil and gas activities. In 1982, just as Mitchell tapped the Barnett, the Fort Worth Court of Appeals rejected the argument that the Railroad Commission preempted municipalities from making their own regulations. They conceived of municipal oil and gas ordinances as zoning laws. This opened a new line of reasoning to the effect that municipalities can legitimately regulate oil and gas activities just as they regulate any other kind of land use. This reasoning was central to a 2013 case in New York where the appellate court upheld the town of Dryden's ban on fracking. The court argued that Dryden's zoning ordinance doesn't regulate the mining industry. Rather, quote, "it simply establishes permissible and prohibited uses of land within the town for the purpose of regulating land generally," end quote. The ordinance is not about the oil and gas industry. It is about such traditional land use considerations as, quote, "proximity to non-industrial districts, compatibility with neighboring land uses, and noise and air pollution," end quote. It was in Los Angeles where a forest of oil derricks first engulfed neighborhoods and created the urban drilling conundrum. In 1965, the chief zoning administrator for LA railed against the, quote, "totally selfish, thoughtless, inefficient, unsightly, and destructive methods employed by the early drilling and producing companies," end quote. To safeguard the city, he argued, quote, "it has become the planner's duty to make sure that if oil drilling is permitted in such communities, it is allowed only under strict control," end quote. But how strict should the controls be? How strict can they be? And who decides? This is something the film Promised Land got right. The fate of multi-million-dollar projects often comes down to a vote at town council or city hall. The future of fracking is being shaped in a big way by what happens at the smallest level of government. For those who are making millions from the newly viable reserves, the focus has shifted from the technical question of how to get the gas flowing to the political question of how to keep it that way. The threat posed by local resistance has the industry so concerned that they are employing military psyops techniques in what they consider a battle against insurgents. The COO of Eagle Ridge Energy even suggested that the nurses, school teachers, and retirees opposing gas wells in Denton are on the Department of Homeland Security's watch list of suspected terrorists. A recent study estimated that the Barnett can produce 45 trillion cubic feet of natural gas by 2050. To date, it has produced 17 trillion cubic feet, and already the landscape looks like this. You are watching an animation depicting the boom in drilling activity in this area from 1997 to 2010. The black dots represent vertical wells, the red dots represent horizontal wells. All of these wells are hydraulically fractured. That means each dot represents something like 5 million gallons of water, thousands of gallons of chemicals, and millions of pounds of sand. The wastewater full of chemicals and sand is trucked away from these sites and poured down disposal wells despite a lack of understanding about the long-term fate of that waste. In nearby Azle, Texas, a rash of 30 earthquakes in 2 months is likely due to injection wells. Many of the chemicals are trade secrets, so we don't know what is being put into the environment. This is how many gallons of non-disclosed and proprietary chemicals were used on a well in Denton that had a blowout and spewed the frack fluid into the air for 14 hours. As the gas wells spread east into urban areas, the Metroplex in turn sprawls westward into the heart of the gas patch. In the 20 years between 1993 and 2013, DFW went from 4 million to over 6.5 million people. It is the fastest growing metropolitan area in the country. During that same period, natural gas production on the Barnett went from 30 million cubic feet per day to over 5,600 million cubic feet per day, nearly a 200-fold increase. Demographically, Denton and Tarrant, home of Fort Worth, are two of the fastest growing counties in the nation. Geologically, they are two of the core counties where the Barnett Shale is richest. The city of Denton issued 24 permits for gas wells in the 33 years between 1967 and 2000. It issued nearly 500 permits in the next 10 years between 2000 and 2010. In an area heavily dependent on air conditioners and SUVs, the production side of energy has come home to roost. Fracking raises a central question about technology. What should we do about the fact that freedom to pursue intended desired outcomes like energy also creates unintentional harms like air pollution? One response is to call on engineers and their corporate employers to take more factors into account prior to enrolling their technologies into society. This precautionary principle sees the technology as guilty until proven innocent. In New York, where there is a moratorium on fracking, proponents must establish that it is safe prior to taking action. There is no drilling while the debate continues. ExxonMobil CEO Rex Tillerson said, quote, "If you want to live by the precautionary principle, then crawl up in a ball and live in a cave." This is way overblown, but by itself the precautionary principle is insufficient because there is no way to prove a technology is innocent. If we want the intended benefits of a technology, we must also risk getting the unintended harms. At some point, the experiment must move out of the lab and into the real world. There are 3 conditions that make a real-world experiment reasonable and fair. First, those most vulnerable to the unintended harms must give their consent to the risk, or at least they must be compensated for any harms incurred. Second, there must be a robust system for monitoring and learning from the real-world experiment. And third, the experiment must be modifiable when problems are identified through the learning process. The original innovation should be amenable to renovation. Fracking, at least in Denton, fails all 3 conditions. First, those put in harm's way often do not own the minerals and thus are not given much of a voice in decisions that impact them. Second, there is insufficient monitoring. Denton's gas well inspectors have no equipment to monitor air and water, and despite a promise by City Council, the city never implemented a monitoring program. Each inspector at the Railroad Commission is responsible for nearly 2,700 wells. In 2011, the average inspector only got around to looking at 1,200 wells. As this footage shows, there are often fugitive emissions of volatile organic compounds and hazardous air pollutants from condensate tanks on pad sites. Some studies estimate the emissions from the shale gas industry in DFW are equivalent to all the cars and trucks on the road. This is particularly problematic for Denton, which has the worst air quality in the state. Even when there is a blowout, as occurred in Denton in April 2013, monitoring can be lax. Here is a video of that blowout. It took the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality 13 hours to arrive on the scene. Eagle Ridge received no violations for this incident. Fracking in Denton also fails the 3rd condition of renovation. Denton is held captive to old regulations. As it learned from its urban drilling experiment and sought to introduce further protections for health, safety, and welfare, Denton found that its new ideas could not be applied to most of the drilling and fracking in town. The gas well pad sites are grandfathered under older regulations by so-called vested rights rules, so it was barred from renovating the system based on new concerns and information. As one city council member said of Denton's new drilling ordinance, quote, "We closed the barn doors after all the cows had already escaped." The Barnett Shale abruptly ends at a geological formation known as the Munster Arch. About 8,000 feet above the Munster Arch today is Interstate 35, which bisects Denton into an eastern and a western half. That's mostly why the more developed eastern half of the city is free from gas wells. The fast-developing west half, however, is riddled with them. Although hundreds of wells were drilled here in the early years of the Barnett boom, it wasn't until 2009 that fracking became a defining issue for Denton. That's when Range Resources applied for a city permit to put 3 wells across the street from McKenna Park, a neighborhood, and the hospital. Citizens protested, but in the end, City Council approved the permit for the 3 gas wells. They said their only other choice would be to face an expensive and losing regulatory takings lawsuit. This is a picture from the nearby playground of Range flaring the wells. No one nearby owned any of the mineral rights. This meant that they had little say in the decision to drill, and would not get any direct benefits for having an industrial site move next door. In response to public outcry, the city initiated what became a 2-year-long rewrite of its gas drilling and production ordinance. Denton had the first ordinance in the region, but other cities like Southlake and Flower Mound had since outstripped Denton in terms of provisions for health, safety, welfare, and community integrity. Drilling and fracking pose several risks, from air and water pollution to reductions in surrounding property values. But how much risk is there? How much is acceptable? And how should those risks be balanced with economic benefits and protections for the rights of mineral property holders? There are more or less reasonable answers to these questions, but there is no right answer in the way there are right answers to math questions. It depends on what you value and how you are situated in relation to the costs and benefits. What counts as the right rules depends on your point of view. Thus, the question that matters most is not what shall the rules be, but who shall make the rules. This was the key question for Denton, as its ordinance became an opportunity to renovate the technological system, to build more values into it. Whose values would be included? Given the technological complexity of the issue, Denton created an expert task force to help draft the new rules. The initial 3-member task force was entirely made up of people from the oil and gas industry. Don Butler was a project manager for an oil and gas consulting firm. John Siegmund was a retired oilman. And Ed Ireland was the head of an industry PR campaign to promote drilling on the Barnett. It is funded in part by Devon Energy, which is the largest gas well operator in Denton. Now he had clearance to closed-door information from city attorneys. In response to public concern over this industry tilt, City Council added 2 community members to the task force, Tom LaPointe, a biologist at UNT, and Vicki Oppenheim, an environmental and urban planner. Tom and Vicki were often outvoted, or their ideas were simply ignored. In addition to the industry-stacked task force, there was the cautious legal narrative behind the scenes. The ordinance was drafted in closed sessions with city attorneys and other legal consultants. As drafts of the ordinance emerged from this veiled process, it became clear that the overriding mood was litigiophobia, fear of an industry lawsuit. That's a valid fear given the predominance of the mineral estate, and given that even home rule municipalities derive their powers from the state. There is always the threat of a regulatory takings or preemption challenge. But a reasonable fear seemed to turn into paranoia when the city refused even to adopt provisions that had been implemented by other cities on the Barnett. These include prohibiting open pits, compressor stations, venting and flaring, and requiring the use of vapor recovery units and air and water monitoring. In many ways, state laws are stacked against city sovereignty. But cities have a winning track record, as one attorney argued. Texas common law generally favors municipal authority to regulate oil and gas activities. Every direct challenge to a city's police powers has been soundly defeated. When City Council made their final vote in January 2013, City Hall was packed. Several people were escorted out by the police. In the end, the citizens didn't get most of what they had asked for. They did, however, get City Council to increase the setback distance between gas well pad sites and protected uses like homes and schools from the original 500 feet to 1,200 feet. But there was a problem. As it turns out, the ordinance and its increased setback distance didn't apply to most of the fracking in Denton. Less than a year after the ordinance passed, 3 drilling rigs popped up within 250 feet of homes. This is a series of aerial photos showing the development of the Meadows at Hickory Creek subdivision in Denton. Note that the 4 gas well pad sites at each corner of the subdivision predate the homes. This neighborhood was built by D.R. Horton, the largest land developer in the nation. The wells were initially drilled by R.L. Atkins Corporation in 2003. Here is a look at the area from the Railroad Commission's map. The wells go by various names, but we can call them the Vintage Wells because they are close to Vintage Boulevard. We'll focus on these 2 pad sites and call them the Northern and Southern Vintage sites. In September 2013, Eagle Ridge Energy received a permit from the Railroad Commission to rework the existing wells on each site. At the time, there was just 1 well on each site, the red asterisks inside the purple rings. And they were permitted to turn these old vertical wells into horizontal wells with laterals extending nearly 3/4 of a mile, as indicated by the thick purple lines. But Eagle Ridge was also given a Railroad Commission permit to add 2 new horizontal wells to the northern site, as shown here. In total, they were granted 4 permits, 2 for pre-existing wells and 2 for new wells to be drilled on a pre-existing site. Nobody in this neighborhood owns the mineral rights. All the minerals pooled and leased in this 268-acre tract are owned by 2 family trusts and 2 businesses based outside of Denton. When people bought these homes, D.R. Horton did not notify them about the gas wells. Big developers are not held to the same standards as realtors when it comes to disclosing the presence of gas wells, and it is such developers that will build and sell most of the 37,000 new housing units in Denton over the next 15 years. Most of this development will happen in similar situations around existing gas wells. Some homes are as close as 200 feet from these vintage sites. Many more are within 500 feet. The school bus drops kids off next to the southern pad site. Why was Eagle Ridge allowed to drill and frack so close to homes when Denton just passed an ordinance requiring a 1,200-foot setback distance? One answer is that Denton's ordinance still allows developers to build as close as 250 feet from pre-existing pad sites. The thinking behind this is caveat emptor, buyer beware. But in this neighborhood, the buyers were not made aware. Land developers can build to maximum capacity, and oil and gas companies can still extract the minerals. Neither loses any revenue. The only losers are the unsuspecting people who actually live there and breathe in the fumes. This hints at the other answer to the question about how Eagle Ridge is able to do this. It has to do with vested rights, which is the most important legal conundrum facing Denton. The issue hinges on a simple question. When does something constitute a new project? State law says that a regulatory agency shall consider the approval of a permit application on the basis of the rules in effect at the time the original application for a permit is filed, or when a plan for development or plat application was filed. It seems reasonable that regulators should not be able to change the rules on a business in the middle of their project. But what is a project? Is it just a gas well, Is it a gas well pad site, so that new wells added to the old site are still part of the same project? Is it an entire 200-acre plat? And when is an activity new? What about turning a vertical well into a horizontal well? What about refracking an existing well? The industry thinks they are vested from the moment they receive a Railroad Commission permit or even a plat. These plats can cover hundreds of acres. If they are right, then they could drill a quote-unquote new well anywhere on that plat, but it would be considered part of an ongoing project and thus not subject to current ordinances. There are many plats around Denton, so this could mean dozens of new wells drilled in close proximity to homes. The city of Denton takes a more restricted reading of the law. In the Vintage case, they did not dispute the two old wells, but the city filed a cease and desist lawsuit against Eagle Ridge, ordering them to stop drilling when they began work on one of the new wells. But the lawsuit was dismissed by an oil and gas friendly judge. Denton retreated. Meanwhile, the residents near the Vintage wells began filing their own lawsuits against Eagle Ridge. They also pressured City Council to stop Eagle Ridge from fracking the wells. A key part of their argument hinged on the specific use permit originally issued by the city for the Vintage wells in 2003. That city permit includes several conditions that were now being violated. The residents asked City Council to revoke this permit. They converged on City Hall just as Eagle Ridge began to stage fracking equipment on the northern pad site. The former mayor of Dish, Texas, Calvin Tillman, took this video of vapors, likely including benzene, coming from the pad site near the university as they were flowing back. The chemicals have a nauseating odor that gave nearby residents headaches. When they filed a complaint, the state regulators notified Eagle Ridge that they were coming to take air samples. Eagle Ridge shut down operations while the inspectors were in town. They then finished up and headed down the road to the Vintage sites. Here is a video of Eagle Ridge fracking the northern Vintage pad site. Residents filed numerous noise complaints and reported various health symptoms, including headaches and nausea. In addition to the intense diesel fumes, you can see such sites also emit a great deal of frac sand or crystalline silica, which is listed on MSDS sheets as a carcinogen. You can see the rooftops of the homes directly behind the site. More homes are planned for the field in front of it, such that when these wells are refracked in the future, they will be surrounded by families. As the Vintage story was unfolding, the city approved more developments that will bring hundreds of homes as close as 250 feet from gas wells. And Eagle Ridge began drilling 2 wells near a middle school and just 760 feet from South Lakes Park. This would be a violation of the 2013 ordinance, but they were working on a pre-existing pad site, so the same confusion was in place. Despite this confusion, the city of Denton entered into an agreement with Eagle Ridge that gave them the permits they needed for all of these controversial wells. At some point, however, activity like this will precipitate a lawsuit on the meaning of vested rights. The findings of such a case will have huge implications. If the industry is as deeply vested as they'd like to think, then it will continue to be open season for drilling in Denton. This presentation is informed by over 2.5 years of research that has drawn from these and many other resources. It is also informed by my experiences as a field philosopher, working with citizens and city leaders in the policy process pertaining to natural gas drilling and production in the city of Denton. I'd like to thank the citizens of Denton who have given so much in the service of our fine city. They give me faith in democracy and remind me of what Alexis de Tocqueville said, quote, "Municipal institutions constitute the strength of free nations. Town meetings are to liberty what primary schools are to science. They bring it within the people's reach. They teach men how to use and how to enjoy it. A nation may establish a free government, but without municipal institutions, it cannot have the spirit of liberty."